never imagined my life would be dragged into a world of glittering chandeliers, elegant gowns and whispers behind champagne glasses. I was 26, a maid who had spent most of her years scrubbing marble floors that never belonged to me. My name is Chloe, and for years I believed invisibility was my greatest shield. If no one saw me, no one could judge me, hurt me, or expect anything from me. But all it took was one envelope, an invitation not even addressed to me, to unravel everything I thought I knew about survival. Michael Carter. My employer was a man whose arrogance carried the weight of entire boardrooms. A millionaire who walked as if the world owed him a debt. I had cleaned his penthouse for almost 2 years, never once expecting him to notice my presence beyond a polite nod or the occasional sharp command. He lived in silence and shadows, a man whose power made others tremble, but who carried wounds he would never show. One afternoon I was dusting his office when I heard his breath hitch. He was staring at a cream-colored card, hands clenched tight around the edges. His jaw, usually set in stone, quivered with something I had never seen on his face before: pain. It was a wedding invitation. His ex-fiancée, Stella, the woman who had once held his heart and his pride, was marrying another man. The words on that delicate paper might as well have been daggers, and I felt the sting of them even though they were not meant for me. That night he summoned me. I walked into the study expecting a task, perhaps some late errand. Instead, he looked at me with an intensity that made me want to shrink back into the shadows. "Chloe," he said, his tone sharp but trembling at the edges, "I need you to accompany me to an event." I froze, my rag still in my hand. "An event, sir? I'm your maid, not an escort. Not a partner." His lips twisted into a cold smile. "I know. But that's exactly why I've chosen you. You're different, invisible to them. And that's precisely what makes you dangerous." I didn't understand then. All I saw was a man asking me to step into a life I had no place in. And yet when he named the sum he would pay me, my thoughts turned to the stack of unpaid bills on my kitchen table, the college course I had been putting off for years. Against my better judgment, I nodded. From that moment my life no longer belonged to me. The next morning a black car arrived outside my apartment. I was whisked into a boutique that smelled of perfume and silk, where stylists circled me like hawks. Dresses I could never dream of affording were draped across my body, high heels pressed into my feet, until I stumbled like a child learning to walk. Michael appeared hours later, his eyes scanning me as if I were a product on display. "She needs to look sophisticated," he ordered, "but not artificial." I wanted to scream, "I am not your project." But the words lodged in my throat, buried beneath fear and the faint spark of something else, curiosity. Days blurred into rehearsals. I was taught how to hold a champagne flute, how to smile without showing too much teeth, how to glide across a dance floor when my instincts begged me to run. Each night I collapsed into bed, exhausted, my body aching from the weight of someone else's world pressing down on me. Then came the wedding. The night air was thick with perfume and tension as the car doors opened. My black dress clung to me like a second skin, and for the first time in years I felt the weight of eyes on me. Michael leaned close before we stepped out. "Remember," he whispers, "today you're not my maid, you're my partner." Partner. The word rattled in my chest. Inside the hall shimmered with golden light. Crystal chandeliers reflected off champagne glasses as powerful men and flawless women turned their heads toward us. Their eyes widened, not at Michael who belonged there, but at me. The maid in borrowed silk. Stella's laughter cut through the air before I saw her. She was radiant, a vision in white, her smile sharp enough to slice. When her eyes landed on me, they narrowed. She walked toward us with the confidence of someone who believed she still owned the man at my side. "Michael," she purred. "What a surprise, and who is your guest?" Before he could answer, I extended my hand, forcing my voice steady. "Chloe, it's a pleasure to meet you." For a moment, Stella's mask cracked. Surprise flickered in her eyes, but she recovered quickly, her lips curving into something between a smile and a sneer. "The pleasure is mine," she said. Michael always did have peculiar tastes. Her words slid under my skin like a blade, but I refused to flinch. I smiled even as my stomach churned, even as my hands trembled. For that night I had promised myself one thing I would not break. Yet as the evening wore on, whispers followed me like shadows. Who was I? Why was I there? Each laugh that drifted from behind me felt like a dagger to my spine. And when Stella pulled me aside, her voice dripping with malice, the world I thought I could endure shattered once again. "So Chloe," she said, crossing her arms. "What's your story? Where did Michael find you?" Her eyes bored into me, searching for cracks in my disguise. My heart pounded, but I forced myself to meet her gaze. "I think Michael should answer for his choices," I said. The corners of her mouth lifted a smile that promised nothing good. "Well," she whispered, "he always did enjoy a challenge." "Good luck, dear." That night, as I stood among people who would never see me as more than a maid dressed in silk, I realized something devastating. The danger wasn't in being invisible. The danger was in being seen. Michael's grip on my arm tightened as Stella walked away, her perfume lingering like poison in the air. His jaw was set, his eyes dark, but I could sense the storm brewing beneath his carefully controlled expression. "You held your own," he muttered almost too quietly to hear. It wasn't praise exactly, it was more like surprise. And maybe that was the first time I understood that to him I wasn't just a pawn. I was an unexpected variable, something he couldn't quite predict. But if Stella's words had shaken him, the rest of the evening felt designed to shatter me. Everywhere I turned, eyes followed, measuring, mocking, dissecting. I caught whispers as sharp as knives made in disguise. Desperate for money. What game is he playing with her? Each laugh dug deeper into my skin until I felt like the silk dress was nothing more than a costume, a mask that could never hide who I really was. Dinner was a performance. I sat beside Michael at a table lined with crystal and gold, pretending to belong while every forkful lodged in my throat, like glass. Stella sat across from us, her new fiancé at her side, but her eyes never left Michael. She laughed too loudly, leaned in too close, her hand grazing her husband-to-be's arm with the kind of careless affection meant only to wound. Every movement was a performance for Michael and by extension for me. Halfway through the meal she raised her glass. "To old flames," she said sweetly, her gaze locked on Michael. "May they burn out completely so new love can shine brighter." The table erupted in polite laughter. I forced a smile, but my chest ached. Michael's hand brushed against mine under the table, a touch so fleeting I might have imagined it. His knuckles were tense, his silence heavy. Later, as music swelled and couples drifted toward the dance floor, Michael stood. "Come," he said, offering me his hand. My stomach lurched. "I don't dance." "You do tonight," he insisted. And so I let him lead me into the center of the room, where chandeliers glimmered overhead and violins whispered promises I couldn't believe. His hand was firm at my waist, guiding me with a steadiness I didn't feel. The world blurred around us, the sneers, the whispers, the pointed fingers, until it was just the two of us, moving in reluctant harmony. But Stella wouldn't let us disappear into that fragile moment. She swept onto the floor, her gown billowing like a queen's robe, her fiancé trailing behind her like an afterthought. She spun close, her laughter slicing through the music, and leaned in just enough for me to hear. "You'll never last," she hissed. "He'll use you to make me jealous, and when he's done you'll be nothing again." Her words struck harder than any slap. For a heartbeat I faltered, nearly stumbling in Michael's arms. But he steadied me, his eyes searching mine. Something flickered there, anger, yes, but also something more dangerous. Possession. The dance ended. Applause rippled. I pulled away too quickly, muttering an excuse as I fled to the edge of the room. My chest heaved, my palms clammy. For the first time I wasn't sure if I feared Stella or the man who had brought me here. Outside the hall, I found a quiet corner, the cool marble wall pressing against my back. I wanted to disappear, to tear off the dress, and run barefoot into the night. But as the muffled music throbbed through the walls, I knew there was no escape. I had stepped into this world, and now I had to survive it. When Michael found me minutes later, his tie loosened, his eyes burning. I braced myself for anger. Instead, his voice was low, almost pleading. "Don't let her break you, that's what she wants." I met his gaze, my voice shaking. "She already has." He didn't argue. He didn't comfort me. He just stood there, silent, as if wrestling demons I couldn't name. And in that silence I understood something terrifying. Stella might not have been the only one with a weapon that night. Because Michael had one too. And it was me. I didn't sleep that night, though I was still standing in that golden room. The chandeliers hummed like a hive, and somehow every bee had my name on its stinger. I kept telling myself I could leave. I could slip out the back, peel off the dress, and go back to being no one. But then I would see Michael across the room, stiff, watchful, a soldier holding the line with sheer posture, and something steadied inside me. I wasn't nothing anymore. I was a choice I had made, and choices carry consequences. Stella moved through her own wedding like a queen inspecting a conquered city. People bent toward her. She didn't bend toward anyone. I thought she'd leave me alone after those little knives she'd whispered on the dance floor, but venom like that doesn't drain quickly. She caught my eye from across the room and smiled the way a cat smiles at a bird that doesn't know the window is open. I needed air. In the corridor, the music softened to a heartbeat. Gold-framed mirrors lined the wall, reflecting me back at myself, as if to ask who I thought I was pretending to be. Voices floated from the powder room, Stella's first low and gleeful, then an older woman's voice edged in pearls. "He brought the maid," Stella said, and the word maid rolled in her mouth like a cheap candy. "Perfect. Let him choke on the spectacle." "Be careful," the older voice warned. "Humiliating a man like Michael in public isn't wise." "Oh, I'm not humiliating him," Stella purred. "I'm reminding him who writes endings. After tonight, he learns I always land higher. Tomorrow the papers will run that little piece about his mother again, how she hid debts in her charity. People adore a repeat scandal." There was a pause, ice clinking in glass. "Stella," the older voice murmured, "you leaked that story years ago. You swore me you didn't." "Please." "I swore to be entertaining," Stella answered, then laughed. "She wanted me out of the family, so I took the family out of her." My stomach turned so fast the corridor warped. Michael's silence, the stone he carried in his jaw. It wasn't pride. It was grief forced into armor. He hadn't just lost a fiancée back then, he'd lost something holy and soft, and this room wore the woman who had cut it out of him like a tiara. I should have walked away. Tighten the dress, fix the lipstick, hold the line. But the final dagger slid out of the bathroom like a snake and coiled around my ankles. "And the groom?" the older voice asked. "Adrian is useful," Stella said, bored now, as if she were discussing a purse she planned to return. "His father wants into Michael's shipping contracts, and Adrian wants my last name written across his future. Everyone gets a toy. Besides, he's too gentle to ask the right questions." My hands shook so hard I had to grip the doorframe. Gentle. I had seen the way Adrian's eyes searched Stella's face like a pilgrim at a shrine. He wasn't a player in her game. He was a candle burning himself down to keep her beautiful. I stepped back before the door swung open. Stella emerged flawless, the older woman, her mother. I realized behind her a storm hidden in lace. Stella didn't see me. Her mother did. For a fraction of a second, something like pity crossed her face. Then she shuddered it and followed her daughter back into the hall. I stood alone with the mirrors. "I am no one," I told the glass. "I am a maid who learned to walk in silk for a night." And yet the truth had picked me anyway. It had dropped into my palms like a live thing, hot and hissing, and I understood with a clarity that made my throat burn. If I returned this truth to silence, I was an accomplice. My phone was in the side pocket of my dress. My hands moved before I could second-guess voice memos. Red dot breath held every cell of me, still listening for another shard of confession that didn't come. It would have to be enough. Truth rarely arrives neatly packaged. You gather what you can, and trust that a beating heart recognizes its own. Back in the ballroom, the air pressed down. Waiters circled with trays. Laughter rose and fell like tide against rock. Michael was near the bar, watching the room with that soldier's stillness. Stella stood at the head table, radiant and starving, her hand laced with Adrian's like a pretty rope. The MC tapped the microphone and the room shimmered toward attention. To the bride and groom, he announced, "We present a film, a celebration of love." Screens bloomed to life around the room, and my blood went cold. Photographs of Stella and Adrian played, first sunlit, curated, pure. Then the tone shifted. Tabloid headlines flashed. Old photos of Michael surfaced, the kind that make a mouth look cruel if you pause at the wrong second. A reporter's voiceover, "Acid-sweet sources say the ex-fiancée left for her own safety." It wasn't a celebration, it was a weapon. A soft attack disguised as nostalgia. I didn't look at Stella. I looked at Michael. He didn't flinch. He didn't blink. He stood inside his body like a man in a burning house who has decided not to run. The film ended to a few hesitant claps that pretended to be applause. I moved before my courage could evaporate. Past tables that smelled like money, past eyes that pricked my skin. Adrian was the closest shoreline, his face open and earnest in the worst possible way. I reached him at the edge of the dais and felt my voice find itself. "I need a word," I said. "Now please." He frowned, the polite disapproval of a good man inconvenienced on his wedding day. "This really isn't." "It is," I said. And something in my tone, desperation, conviction, maybe both, made him follow me 3 steps into the wings behind a velvet curtain that smelled like dust and roses. I held up my phone. "You don't know me, I'm nobody, but I heard something you need to hear." He reached for the phone and stopped. "If this is some game." "It isn't a game," I said, and I thought of how Stella had said gentle like an insult. And something inside me refused to let that be the truth. "It's your life." He listened. Not long, less than a minute, but long enough for a colorless shock to wash his face clean of certainty. When the recording ended, he didn't hand the phone back right away. He stared at it like it had teeth. "What is this?" he asked, though the question was prayer-shaped. "It's what she said," I answered. "I wish it weren't." He looked past me to the ballroom where his future waited, with her hand on the knife. All the soft in him hardened. He squared his shoulders, a man about to walk into fire, and offered me back my phone. "Thank you," he said, and the syllables sounded like semicolons, not periods. Not the end. A turning. I could have slipped away then. Vanished into the corridor and let cause and effect write whatever came next. But the MC was back at the microphone, inviting Stella to speak, and I felt the room tilting toward another performance drenched in lies. My legs moved without asking my permission. I stepped from the wings and kept walking until I stood at the edge of the stage, the world bright and terrible as noon. "Chloe," Michael said behind me, my name like a warning and a prayer. I didn't turn. I was already falling into whatever came next. The microphone in Stella's hand glittered like a dagger. She basked in the applause as if the world had gathered solely to worship her. The silk of her gown shimmered under the lights, a vision of perfection so carefully constructed that no one would suspect the rot beneath. I felt my heart pound against my ribs, my throat dry as sand, but my legs carried me forward. When I stepped fully into the spotlight, gasps rippled through the hall. I was the outsider, the maid in a borrowed dress, daring to interrupt a queen on her throne. Stella's eyes snapped to me, icy and cutting. "What is this?" she hissed, her smile never faltering for the crowd. "Michael, control your guest." But Michael didn't move. He stood at the edge of the stage, his gaze locked on me as if waiting to see whether I would shatter or rise. I lifted my chin, voice trembling but loud enough to echo through the hall. "I know I don't belong here. I know I'm not one of you. But I heard something tonight. Something that Adrian deserves to hear before he vows the rest of his life." The crowd stirred, whispers colliding like waves. Stella laughed, sharp and cruel. "This is pathetic. You bring your maid to my wedding, Michael, and now she plays messenger. What could she possibly know?" I turned to Adrian. His face was pale, confusion and fear warring in his eyes. My fingers clenched around the phone in my hand. "She doesn't love you," I said softly. "She never did, and she said so herself." The room fell into a stunned silence. Stella's mask cracked for the first time, fury flashing beneath her flawless exterior. "Lies," she snapped. "She's desperate for attention. Throw her out." But Adrian's voice cut through hers, raw and breaking. "Play it." Stella froze. "Play it," he repeated louder this time, his hands trembling at his sides. I pressed the screen, and the recording filled the hall. Stella's voice, dripping with malice, spoke of Adrian as nothing more than a tool of Michael's mother, as a casualty of her schemes of power and amusement, woven into cruelty. Each word struck like a hammer against glass, shattering the illusion she had built. By the time it ended, the hall was so silent I could hear my own heartbeat. Adrian's face was white with devastation. His mother clutched his arm, her lips pressed into a trembling line. Stella's eyes blazed with hatred, her composure fracturing. "This is manipulation. Michael planned this. He brought his maid here to sabotage me. But the guests were no longer looking at me. Their eyes were fixed on her, on the venom in her voice, on the cracks widening in the mask she had worn so perfectly. Adrian stepped back from her, his chest heaving. "You destroyed him once," he said, voice hoarse. "And now you wanted to destroy me too. I won't let you." The hall erupted. Gasps, shouts, cameras flashing as guests pulled out their phones. Stella's empire of lies collapsed around her in real time. I should have felt triumphant, but all I felt was hollow. The recording had torn the truth into the light, but truth has teeth. I could see it in Adrian's broken expression and Michael's dark eyes, in the way Stella's fury threatened to scorch me alive. Because even when you win against someone like her, no one truly leaves unscarred. Michael reached me, then his hand firm at my back as the chaos swirled. "Come," he murmured, guiding me away from the stage. His voice was steady, but I felt the storm in his touch. "You've done enough tonight." Enough. The word echoed in my chest, maybe too much. As we slipped into the cold night air, cameras flashing behind us, I knew one thing for certain. Nothing about my life would ever be invisible again. The night air bit into my skin like needles, cold and sharp after the suffocating heat of the ballroom. Michael's car was already waiting at the curb, headlights casting long beams across the wet pavement. I wanted to run into the shadows to hide from the storm I had unleashed. But Michael's hand pressed gently against my back, steadying me as though I were about to collapse. Inside the car, silence wrapped around us. My hands trembled in my lap, the phone still clutched tight, its black screen reflecting fragments of my face. I had wanted to expose the truth, but the way Stella's world had exploded felt less like justice, and more like destruction. Adrian's pale, shattered expression haunted me. He didn't deserve to learn on his wedding night that he had been nothing more than a pawn. Finally, Michael spoke, his voice low and raw. "You didn't just save him, Chloe, you saved me." I turned, startled. His face was shadowed by the city lights flickering through the window, but I could see the grief etched there, old and deep. "She killed my mother's reputation," he whispered. "Turned her name into a weapon. I tried to fight, but I was too blind, too angry. Tonight you gave me back something I thought I'd lost forever, proof that she was the monster, not us." I didn't know what to say. I was just a maid who had stumbled into his war. Yet his hand reached across the seat, covering mine with a warmth that made my chest ache. For the first time, he wasn't the untouchable millionaire, and I wasn't the invisible servant. We were two broken souls bound together by the ruins of Stella's lies, but healing is never clean. The following days were chaos. The tabloids devoured the scandal, plastering Stella's name across headlines with gleeful malice. Adrian vanished from public view, his family retreating behind closed doors. As for me, whispers followed wherever I went about the maid who had shattered a wedding, the outsider who had dared to expose the elite. The worst came from Stella herself. Late one night, I found a letter slipped beneath my apartment door. No signature, but I knew her handwriting, sharp and elegant. "You think you've won? You've only made yourself a target. Michael will tire of you, and when he does, you'll be nothing again. Remember, maids don't become queens, they get discarded." My hand shook as I read it, but I burned the paper before it could poison me further. Her words were venom, but they also revealed her fear. For the first time, Stella wasn't untouchable. Michael tried to shield me from the fallout. He offered to move me into his penthouse to give me security, even protection. But I couldn't bring myself to accept. I needed to stand on my own feet to prove to him, to Stella, to myself, that I was more than someone's servant, or someone's charity. And yet, late at night, when the world quieted, I would remember the way his hand had held mine in that car, the way his voice had cracked when he spoke of his mother. Something dangerous was growing between us, something fragile and fierce. I told myself it was impossible, that men like him don't fall for women like me. But every time his eyes found mine across a crowded room, every time his voice softened when he spoke my name, I felt the truth pressing closer. This wasn't just his revenge anymore. It was becoming my story too. The days blurred into weeks, and still the echoes of that wedding clung to me like smoke after a fire. Everywhere I went, whispers followed. At the market, women glanced over their shoulders, muttering about the maid who ruined a bride. On the subway, Stranger's eyes lingered too long, filled with equal parts curiosity and judgment. I had stepped into the light once, and now there was no retreating into invisibility. Michael, however, moved through the chaos with the calm precision of a man who had survived worse storms. Stella's empire was crumbling. Endorsements, withdrawn investors fleeing her carefully constructed image, unraveling piece by piece. The tabloids that once adored her now fed on her downfall with cruel delight. But she wasn't finished, and I knew it. A woman like Stella doesn't vanish quietly. I was proven right when Michael called me into his office one evening. His voice was tight-clipped, a mask stretched over fury. On his desk lay a glossy magazine, its cover splashed with my photograph, me in the black dress standing beside him at the wedding, eyes wide with shock. The headline screamed, "Millionaire's Revenge. Did he replace his fiancée with the maid?" My stomach dropped. I reached for the magazine with trembling hands, scanning the poisonous words inside. They painted me as desperate, manipulative, a woman clawing her way into wealth by seducing her employer. Every detail of my life had been twisted into ridicule: my childhood poverty, my single-room apartment, even Miguel, the little brother I had raised as my own after our parents died. They went after him. I whispered, my voice breaking. "He's just a boy. He has nothing to do with this." Michael's jaw tightened, his hands curling into fists. "This was Stella," he said. "She's desperate. She'll drag you through the mud until there's nothing left." I wanted to be strong, but that night when I returned home, I broke. I held Miguel's face in my hands and promised him he was safe, even as fear clawed at my chest. I lay awake until dawn, staring at the ceiling, wondering if Stella was right. Maids don't become queens. Maybe I had been foolish to think I could survive in a world built to crush women like me. But then I remembered Adrian's face when he heard the recording, the way truth had burned through the lies, undeniable and sharp. And I remembered Michael's voice, raw with gratitude, telling me I had given him back something he thought he'd lost forever. That was my proof that even someone like me could matter. So when Michael asked if I wanted to disappear to let him handle the war alone, I shook my head. "No," I said. "I won't hide. Not anymore." His eyes softened, something fierce flickering behind them. For a moment he looked at me, not as his maid, not even as his ally, but as something else entirely, something dangerous, something precious. Still, the battle ahead loomed heavy. Stella was cornered, and a cornered animal is most vicious. And though I had already torn off her mask, I could feel it. She had one last strike left, and this time she would aim straight for the heart. I didn't know then whether it would be Michael's or mine. Stella's last strike came like thunder without warning. It was a Thursday morning when Michael's driver appeared outside my apartment, face pale, hands clenched on the steering wheel. "He needs you at the office," he said, his voice low. I climbed into the back seat, my stomach tight with dread. By the time we reached the skyscraper, I already sensed it. Something terrible had happened. The lobby was buzzing, journalists pressed against the glass, cameras flashing like lightning. Security struggled to keep them back, but I could hear the questions they shouted. Is it true she forged documents? Was the maid part of a scam? My legs shook as I forced my way upstairs. Michael was in his office, shoulders rigid, eyes dark. On his desk lay a stack of papers, contracts with my name scrawled at the bottom in signatures that weren't mine. "She's framing you," Michael said flatly. "Forged documents, fake bank transfers, the works. According to this, you siphoned money from one of my accounts. If the press believes it, if the board believes it, you'll be finished. And so will I." My throat closed, but I didn't. I know he cut me off softer now. I know you didn't. But the world doesn't care about truth, Chloe. They care about a story, and Stella just handed them one. The room tilted. I gripped the edge of his desk to stay upright. She had already taken so much: my dignity, my safety, my anonymity. Now she wanted my freedom, unid. I should have been afraid for myself, but all I could think of was Miguel. If they believed I was a criminal, what would happen to him? Would they take him away from me? Michael must have seen the panic in my face, because he came around the desk and took my hands in his. "Listen to me. We'll fight this. But I need you steady. No running, no hiding. You're stronger than she is, Chloe. You proved that the night you exposed her. Tears blurred my vision, but I nodded. I couldn't let her win, not again. The next days were hell. Tabloids feasted on the scandal, splashing my face across covers with words like thief and con artist. Neighbors avoided my eyes. Even Miguel came home from school with tears in his eyes after classmates mocked him. Every night I lay awake listening to his quiet sobs, and hated myself for dragging him into this war. But Michael didn't waver. He set his best investigators on the case, combing through every document, every transaction. And slowly, piece by piece, the truth emerged. The fake accounts were tied to shell companies linked directly to Stella's inner circle. The final blow came when one of her own assistants cracked under pressure. She admitted everything. Stella had orchestrated the scheme, desperate to destroy me before her own empire collapsed completely. When the news broke, it was Stella's face, not mine, that filled the headlines. Heiress exposed in fraud scandal. Her fall was swift, brutal, and this time irreversible. I should have felt relief, even triumph. But all I felt was exhaustion. Sitting in Michael's office as the city roared with gossip outside, I whispered, "It's over." He looked at me for a long moment, then shook his head. "No, Chloe, this is just the beginning." His words made my chest ache, because I knew he wasn't just talking about Stella. He was talking about us, about the bond forged in fire, about the dangerous pull between a maid who had been invisible and a millionaire who had once been untouchable. But even in that fragile moment of victory, fear lingered. Because I couldn't help but wonder, when the world was done feasting on Stella's downfall, would they turn on us next? Michael was right, it wasn't the end. If anything, it was the start of something neither of us could have prepared for. In the weeks after Stella's fall, the world seemed determined to stitch me into his story, whether I wanted it or not. Reporters camped outside my building, snapping photos every time I stepped outside. Headlines shifted from scandal to spectacle, from maid to millionaire's muse, Cinderella or con. My face was everywhere, distorted by the angle of someone else's lens. My story twisted to fit whatever narrative would sell. At first I thought I could weather it. I walked with my head down, ignored the whispers, tried to focus on Miguel and the small comforts of home. But fame, even the wrong kind, has a way of seeping into every corner. Miguel's school called, concerned about the bullying he faced. My landlord politely suggested it might be best if we moved, given the attention. Strangers knocked on my door, some asking for autographs, others spitting cruel words before disappearing into the night. I broke one evening clutching Miguel in my arms as he cried into my shoulder. "Why do they hate us, Chloe?" he asked. "We didn't do anything wrong." I had no answer. My chest ached with guilt. I wanted to scream that it wasn't fair, that I never asked for any of this. But instead I held him tighter and whispered the only truth I could cling to, because they're afraid of us. And people only fear what they can't control. Michael saw what it was doing to me. He insisted I move into his penthouse where security could keep the vultures at bay. I resisted, terrified of what the gossip would become if I lived under his roof. But one night when I returned home to find a slur spray painted across my door, I gave in. Living with Michael was its own kind of storm. His world was polished marble and glass, every surface gleaming, every shadow carefully controlled. I felt like an intruder in my own life, tiptoeing around the silence of his wealth. But slowly something shifted. He stopped treating me like a guest, and I stopped pretending I was only there out of necessity. We cooked dinner together badly, with burnt pasta and too much garlic. He laughed for the first time in years, a sound so raw it startled us both. He sat with Miguel over homework, patient, in a way I never expected. And late at night, when the city lights spilled across his office, we talked. About his mother, about my parents, about the parts of ourselves we'd buried to survive. And in those quiet hours I realized something terrifying. I was falling for him, but love was dangerous. Love meant vulnerability, and I had already been ripped open too many times. Every time his hand brushed mine, every time his gaze lingered too long, I pulled back. I reminded myself of Stella's words, that I would always be nothing more than a maid in silk. That when the world was done devouring her, it would turn its hunger back on me. Yet no matter how hard I tried to resist, the truth was undeniable. Michael had become more than my protector, more than my employer. He had become the one person who saw me not as a maid, not as a scandal, but as a woman who refused to break. And that terrified me most of all, because if I let myself love him, and he chose to walk away, I wasn't sure I'd survive it. I told myself I could keep my heart locked away, that I could live in Michael's world without letting it consume me. But the heart is a traitor. It whispers truths when the mind begs for silence. It happened one evening when Miguel had gone to bed, and the city outside glowed with restless light. Michael and I sat across from each other at his long dining table, a half-empty bottle of wine between us. The conversation drifted from small talk into heavier places. The mother he had lost to Stella's lies, the father who had buried himself in work. The loneliness that came with wealth no one dared question. "You're the only one who's ever stood in front of me without fear," he said suddenly, his voice low. "Do you know what that means to me?" I froze, the glass trembling in my hand. "I wasn't fearless," I whispered. "I was desperate. There's a difference." He leaned closer, his eyes searching mine. "Maybe. But desperation doesn't give someone courage. You did that yourself." The air between us shifted, charged and dangerous. I wanted to look away, to build a wall out of silence, but instead I felt myself leaning forward, too drawn into the gravity of his confession. And for one suspended heartbeat, I let myself wonder what it would feel like if he kissed me. But before anything could happen, the sound of Miguel's footsteps broke the spell. He padded into the room, sleepy-eyed, asking for water. I practically leapt from my chair, grateful for the interruption, terrified of what might have happened if it hadn't come. That night, as I tucked Miguel back into bed, I pressed my forehead to his and whispered, "It's just us, okay? No matter what happens, it's always us." Yet even as I said the words, my chest ached with doubt. Because part of me wanted more. Wanted Michael. And wanting him felt like betrayal to myself, to the life I had promised Miguel, to the fragile safety we had carved from the wreckage. The world outside wasn't ready to let us breathe. Stella, though disgraced, hadn't vanished. Anonymous blogs began to publish venom again, hinting that Michael had replaced her with me, as some twisted act of revenge. They dug into my past, twisting every hardship into proof that I was nothing but a gold digger. One article printed a photo of Miguel taken without my knowledge, his school uniform circled in red ink, with the words, "Her real motivation," scrawled across it. My blood ran cold. That night I found myself shaking so violently, I could barely hold the phone as I called Michael. "They're going after him," I cried. "He's just a child. I won't let him be part of this." Michael arrived within minutes, his presence filling the apartment like a shield. He pulled the article from my trembling hands and tore it in half, then again, until it was nothing but scraps. "They'll never touch him," he swore. "Not while I'm here." I wanted to believe him. But fear is stubborn, and doubt clung to me like smoke. Could any promise stand against a world so hungry for blood? That night, long after Miguel slept, Michael found me on the balcony staring at the city lights with tears drying on my cheeks. He stood beside me in silence for a while, then said quietly, "You don't have to fight this alone anymore." I turned to him, my defenses crumbling. "But what if you regret it? What if I'm just another weapon in your war against her? When it's over, what will I be to you?" His gaze was steady, unwavering. "Not a weapon, not a scandal. Chloe, you're the one thing in this entire mess that feels real." My heart ached at his words, because deep down I knew he was telling the truth, and for the first time I wasn't sure if I was strong enough to resist it any longer. His words hung in the night air like something sacred, too heavy to ignore, too fragile to touch. I turned back toward the city, afraid that if I met his eyes again, I would fall. My whole life I had built walls out of necessity. Poverty had taught me not to dream. Betrayal had taught me not to trust, and survival had taught me to stay small. But Michael's voice, it was chipping at the walls I thought could never crack. The days that followed blurred together in a haze of tension and unspoken feelings. Living under his roof meant constant proximity, shared breakfasts where Miguel giggled over burnt toast, long evenings where Michael and I sifted through reports of Stella's ongoing collapse, and the quiet moments in between when his gaze lingered too long. Each time I felt myself unravel a little more. But love doesn't grow in silence alone, it grows in fire. And fire came when Stella resurfaced. It started with a gala. Michael insisted on attending, though I begged him not to. She'll be there, I warned. She's waiting for a chance to strike back. That's exactly why I have to go, he replied. If I don't, she wins, and I won't let her control the narrative anymore. So I went with him, my dress borrowed once again. My heart pounding as we stepped into a ballroom full of diamonds and daggers disguised as smiles. Stella stood near the stage, radiant in red, her eyes locking onto us the moment we entered. The crowd parted around her like waves around a predator. All night I felt her eyes on me, sharp and unrelenting. When she finally approached, her smile was sweet poison. Still playing the part, Chloe, she whispered as she brushed past me. Careful. Queens don't last long in borrowed crowns. I clenched my fists, refusing to give her the satisfaction of a reaction. But inside, her words burrowed deep. Later, as the gala wound down, Stella made her move. She took the microphone during a charity auction, her voice dripping with feigned grace. It warms my heart to see so many here tonight, especially old friends, she said, her eyes cutting toward Michael and their companions. The audience chuckled, but she wasn't finished. She gestured to a large screen behind her, where suddenly photos flashed, grainy, invasive images of me leaving my apartment, holding Miguel's hand, shopping for groceries. Each one was paired with captions, mocking my past, the maid before the millionaire, single mother or social climber. My chest tightened. The humiliation was suffocating, each photo a dagger thrown under the glow of chandeliers. I wanted to run, but Michael's hand gripped mine like steel. Don't move, he murmured. She wants you to break. The crowd buzzed with whispers, some shocked, others amused. Stella's smile widened, sensing her victory. But then Michael stepped forward, taking the microphone from her hand. Enough, he said, his voice carrying across the hall like thunder. You want to shame her? You'll go through me first. And let me tell you, she's worth more than every lie you've ever built. Gasps echoed. Stella's face twisted, her mask slipping as rage boiled beneath. And me, I stood frozen, my heart a storm. Because in that moment he hadn't just defended me, he had claimed me. When the gala ended, the car ride home was silent, heavy with everything unsaid. Miguel was asleep in the back seat, his head resting against the window. Michael's hand brushed mine on the seat between us, and this time I didn't pull away. For the first time I let myself wonder what it would mean to stop resisting. To choose him not out of desperation or survival but out of love. And yet deep inside a question gnawed at me. Stella wasn't finished. She would strike again. And when she did, would the bond between Michael and me be strong enough to survive it? The night after the gala, sleep refused to come. I lay awake in the guest room of Michael's penthouse, staring at the ceiling while Miguel's soft breathing filled the silence. My phone buzzed again and again on the nightstand, messages from blocked numbers, anonymous voices dripping with venom. Gold digger. Trash and silk. He'll throw you away like the rest. I pressed my hands over my ears, but the words were already inside me. No matter how tightly I held myself, they echoed in the cracks of my bones. The next morning, Michael found me in the kitchen, a mug of untouched coffee cooling between my hands. His eyes swept over me, catching the exhaustion I couldn't hide. She got to you, he said softly. I wanted to deny it, to pretend I was unshakable, but my voice betrayed me. She's right, isn't she? When this is over, when the smoke clears, who am I to you, a maid in a borrowed crown? Michael stepped closer, his hand brushing the porcelain from my trembling grip. You're the only person in this whole poisoned world who's ever told me the truth. Do you think I'd trade that for a crown? His words burned into me, but before I could answer, Miguel's laughter floated in from the living room. He was watching cartoons, innocent in a world that wanted to devour us. That sound anchored me. It reminded me why I couldn't let Stella win. Days passed, each one heavier than the last. Stella's smear campaign escalated. Leaked emails, doctored photos, fabricated bank statements, all carefully designed to paint me as a schemer who had trapped Michael for money and status. But then one night the war turned. Michael's investigator returned with evidence, undeniable, irrefutable proof. Financial trails linking Stella to offshore accounts, bribes to journalists, even payments to photographers who had stalked me and Miguel. The mountain of lies she had built was about to collapse on top of her. Michael paced his office like a caged animal, papers spread across the desk. We could go to the press tomorrow, end this. But once we do, she's finished, not just socially, Chloe, legally. She could face prison. I stared at the stack of evidence, my chest heavy. I had dreamed of this moment: justice, vindication, revenge. Yet staring at the documents, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt haunted. If we destroy her, I whispered, what does that make us? Michael's jaw tightened. She destroyed my mother. She nearly destroyed you. Don't tell me you pity her. I don't, I said, though part of me wondered if I lied. But if we do this, there's no going back. We'll carry it forever. He looked at me, then something raw and aching in his eyes. I don't care about carrying it as long as I carry it with you. The room went still. My breath caught in my throat. I had fought so hard not to fall, not to give him the piece of me Stella had mocked, but in that moment, the walls crumbled. He reached for my hand across the desk, and this time I didn't pull away. But even as his fingers closed around mine, the thought whispered in the back of my mind, victory has a price. And I wasn't sure yet what it would cost us. The next morning, the choice lay before us like a blade, cold, gleaming, irreversible. Michael's team was ready. The documents were organized, the press briefings drafted, even the prosecutors quietly alerted. All it would take was one word from him, one nod, and Stella's empire would implode in the harsh light of truth. But the weight of it pressed on me harder than I expected. I paced the length of his office, my bare feet silent on the marble, while he stood behind his desk, like a general on the brink of war. Why hesitate? He asked finally, his voice sharp but not unkind. She never hesitated when she went after you. Or Miguel. Or my mother. Why should you show her mercy? She never once gave. I swallowed hard, my throat tight. Because once we do this, Michael, there's no line left between us and her. We'll have destroyed someone, and I don't know if I can carry that on my soul. He came around the desk, his step slow, his gaze locked on mine. You don't have to carry it alone. Let me. The words should have soothed me. Instead, they pierced deeper. Because I wasn't afraid of Stella's fall. I was afraid of what would rise in me if I let it happen, the hunger for vengeance, the dark satisfaction of seeing her broken. What if it changed me? What if it made me someone Miguel wouldn't recognize anymore? That night, unable to sleep, I found myself on the balcony again. The city stretched below, glittering and endless, and for the first time, I wondered where I truly belonged in it. A maid who had stepped into silk? Or a woman who had stumbled into a war far bigger than herself? Michael joined me, silent at first. Then he said, you think mercy makes you weak. But it's the only thing that's kept you from becoming her. I turned, startled, but his eyes were steady, softer than I'd ever seen them. Do you want me to stop? He asked. If you say the word, I'll bury the evidence. I'll let her walk free. The enormity of that choice crashed over me. To hold someone's future in your hands, even in enemies, it was a power I never wanted, and yet here it was burning in my palms. I don't want her to walk free, I whispered, tears stinging my eyes. But I don't want to lose myself either. Michael's hand cupped my cheek, gentle grounding. Then we'll find another way. Together. In his arms for a fleeting moment, the storm quieted. And yet, even as I leaned into him, I knew this wasn't the end of the war. Stella would fight to her last breath, and the world would keep demanding a spectacle. But for the first time, I also knew this: I wasn't fighting alone anymore. And maybe love wasn't a weakness after all. Days later, the world made the choice for us. One of the investigators leaked fragments of the evidence without Michael's permission. By dawn, the headline screamed across every paper in glowing screens: Stella Carter, fraud, bribery, lies exposed. The story spread like wildfire, accounts traced to her name, whispers of bribes, her inner circle scattering like birds from a burning tree. Michael slammed the newspaper down on his desk, fury flashing in his eyes. I told them to wait, to let us decide, but it was too late. The dominoes had fallen. Prosecutors opened an inquiry, her sponsors pulled contracts, and the once glittering woman who had tormented us was now a spectacle of disgrace. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I stood at the window watching the city swirl with chaos, my reflection pale against the glass. There was no satisfaction in her ruin, only exhaustion, as if I had poured every piece of myself into this fight and had nothing left to give. That evening, Miguel crawled into my lap, his small arms wrapping around my neck. Is the bad lady gone now? He asked softly. I kissed the crown of his head, fighting back tears. She won't hurt us anymore, I whispered. But deep inside I wondered if lies ever truly disappear, or if they just change shape waiting for a weaker moment to strike again. Michael found me later sitting in the quiet with Miguel asleep against me. He crouched beside us, his hand brushing my hair back, his expression gentler than I had ever seen. "You carried the weight of this war," he said. "And you never should have had to." I shook my head. "We carried it together, that's why we survived." For a long moment, he was silent, his gaze locked on mine, unguarded. Then, in a voice raw with something dangerously close to hope, he whispered, "Stay. Not as my mate, not as my shield. Stay because you want to." My chest tightened, torn between fear and the truth that had been growing inside me for weeks. I wanted to stay, not for the protection, not for the penthouse walls that kept the world at bay, but for the man who had shown me that my voice mattered, even when the world tried to silence it. But love after betrayal is fragile and scars do not vanish overnight. I lowered my gaze, my voice trembling. "I don't know if I'm ready." He touched my chin, lifting my eyes back to his. "Neither am I," he admitted. "But maybe we don't have to be ready. Maybe we just have to be willing." The weight in my chest eased just a little. For the first time, I let myself lean into him, my forehead resting against his. In the silence, the city roared outside. But here in this fragile space, there was only us two people scarred by betrayal, daring to believe in something like healing. And as I closed my eyes, I realized the truth. Stella had lost more than her empire. She had lost her power over me, because I was no longer invisible, I was no longer afraid. And for the first time in my life, I was free to choose what came next. If my story has touched you, if you've ever felt underestimated, betrayed, or broken, and still found the strength to rise, please like this video, share it, so others can find hope, and subscribe for more stories that remind us we're not alone. And I would love to hear from you in the comments. What moment in your life taught you that you were stronger than you ever imagined?